Thank you, everyone. Really excited to be here. I did not ever think I was going to be on this side of an AMS talk before, but here we are. I'm going to share my screen here and get us started. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. As Jared said, my name is Sam Dunaiski. I'm with Renew Wisconsin. I am the Distributed Renewable Energy Program Director. That's actually the first time I've said that in a presentation before, so I'm still kind of learning how to get it off the tongue. I just was promoted last week, so very excited about that. I grew up in Minnesota, actually. I grew up in Duluth. You guys know Duluth probably is the place you go to vacation in the summer, and went here to University of Wisconsin-Madison for my atmospheric and oceanic sciences degree. Lived on the East Coast for a while, worked in the Twin Cities for a while as well, for on and off for about 10 years as a meteorologist. And about 4 years ago, my wife got a great job opportunity here in Madison, and we decided to move. And at that point, I thought that it was a good time for a career change. Still love weather, still love meteorology. I'm on the SPC site every summer, just like everybody else. I'm on, College of DuPage site every time there's a big winter storm rolling in. So still love weather, but definitely excited that I've made this career change. So I'm going to be talking about renewable energy, which is the field that I'm in now, kind of through a meteorologist lens. And I'm based here in Wisconsin, of course, and going to try to keep it as general as possible to incorporate you all, of course, but I'm going to talk about kind of some of the differences between Wisconsin and Minnesota policy-wise and renewable energy-wise and things like that. So this is us. We're a small nonprofit. There's only 2, 4, 6, 8. It's actually we're down to 6 now. 2 of those people are actually gone since we last took this photo. Moved on to bigger and better things. Our director there, the tall guy in the middle, is actually a public service commissioner now, one of only 3, appointed by Governor Evers, so that's super exciting. We work on solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, biogas, and electric vehicles. I'm mainly going to be talking just about solar and wind today, because those are the 2 main renewable energy types that are so tied to meteorology, excuse me. So this is what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to start out with some meteorological relationships with renewable energy. We're going to talk about some roadblocks, both physical, meteorological. That's why I got out of this field, and other. And then we're also going to talk about kind of the road ahead, what's shaping up for us here in Wisconsin, what's shaping up for us in the Midwest, globally, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully you'll come away with even more renewable energy knowledge than you had before tonight. So I'm going to talk about mainly wind and solar, like I said. Most of you can probably guess what are the, kind of the basic needs for both of those renewable energy types, but we're going to go over them in a little bit more detail. We're going to start with solar. And coincidentally, this photo right here is actually a photo of my parents' solar array outside of Duluth. And that leads, I love this photo. I think it's just super great. And that actually leads into kind of my first substantial slide, which is sunlight. So as you can see there, if people in Duluth, Minnesota can do solar, it can be possible just about anywhere. So this right here is a map of the average solar insolation that strikes the Earth every year. So this is kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. You don't have to worry too much about the units themselves. I know I shouldn't say that to a group of scientists, but basically what you need to take away from this is, the oranges and the reds are areas, as you can probably guess, receive a lot of sunlight. Areas in blue, purple, not so much sunlight. So here in the Midwest, we're kind of in the green, certainly not as much as California or Arizona, but a lot more than places like Portland or Seattle, and certainly a lot more than some place like Germany. As you probably know, Germany is almost further north than even the northernmost parts of Minnesota, even the southernmost part of Germany. And they do a lot more solar energy than we do here in the US. Typically, Germany does anywhere from about 8 to 12% annually. Their annual electric mix is solar energy. Here in Wisconsin, we do less than 1%. I know you guys in Minnesota do a little more, but my thoughts are always Wisconsin-centric, so that's kind of what we're looking at here. So, but the point of this, the main takeaway from this map, as you can see, is we have a much better solar resource than Germany has, but we definitely are not taking advantage of it nearly as much as we should. So that's kind of the main takeaway from this slide. So how do we orient solar? As you can probably guess, well, certainly we need sun, obviously, right? Definitely is kind of the main factor there. So we look for unshaded areas, whether it's a utility scale solar operation or whether it's a small, even just like a house residential scale solar installation, we look for unshaded areas. If you have trees, hills, buildings, other things blocking your view, you're not going to make sun. You're not going to make energy, obviously. Ideally, we'd like for a south-facing array, but that is not necessarily critical to solar arrays functionality. As little as 4 or 5 years ago, that absolutely was the case. Your array had to face due south in order to collect enough sunlight per year to offset your electrical needs. Now, due to increases in technology and some policy work as well, east and west facing arrays are okay. There's a lot of utility scale installations now that actually have these things called sun trackers, which actually they're racks that follow the sun throughout the day. So, obviously in the morning they start in the east and they rotate around to the south and then over to the west in the afternoon. So just another example of how technology is really helping to make these types of renewable energies work. Ideally, in this part of the country, we want somewhere from a 10 to a 50 degree angle to the horizon. For the most part, these are the three main things that we're concerned with: the angle, the direction or the orientation, and then whether or not it's shaded as well. So, pretty straightforward for the most part. But like I said, lots of changes due to technology improvements, energy efficiency upgrades, things like that. The other question I get asked a lot, especially as a former meteorologist, is other questions kind of surrounding the weather, especially here in the Midwest. We worry a lot about snow, as you can probably guess, especially over the last couple of days in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. If snow falls on your panels, you're not going to make electricity. There's just no way around it. The good news is, because panels are typically black or a navy blue, they have better albedo values. So typically the snow that does fall on those panels will melt and it'll slide right off. Typically, like I said, the panels are at an angle. There's always electricity flowing through them. So unless we get like a really big heavy snowfall followed by a really harsh cold snap, that snow will typically melt off your panel in a day, maybe 2 or 3 days at the most. In addition to that, they can also withstand, as you can see by this great GIF, large hail up to golf ball size, and also hurricane force winds as well. There was a few years ago, I forget the name of the hurricane, but it went through North Carolina. The natural gas plant there, I believe, went offline because it was taken out by the winds of the hurricane.
Hurricane Matthew.
And but the solar plant, the solar factory, whatever you want to call it, the solar array nearby that was owned by the utility did not go offline. So super, really interesting stuff there as well. I'm going to shift gears to wind now a little bit. Also, by the way, this is a pretty small group, so if there are any questions, feel free to stop and interrupt me as well. So wind, as you can guess, probably pretty straightforward. We obviously want our wind turbines located in windy areas. As you can probably guess, those are typically areas, flatter areas, the plains of the US especially. So this is 2 different maps of average annual wind speeds in the United States. The map on the left is the wind speed at 80 meters, and the map on the right is the wind speed at 100 meters. And this map is going to be very critical for my next slide, because wind turbines are growing. They're getting much, much bigger. This is a big reason why wind power has become so incredibly efficient and widespread now, especially across the central portion of the US. Some of the largest turbines now are getting into several hundred meters in height. The average one now is typically around 400, 450 feet, about 400 feet, and then with the blades, it gets to close to 500 feet. So as you move up in height, you get access to much better wind, as you can probably guess. And you don't actually need a ton of wind to generate power with these turbines. Typically, the cut-in speed is around 7 to 9 miles per hour. That's when they start generating electricity. Ideally, most turbines sort of max out, or they are most efficient, I should say, not max out. They're the most efficient at about 25 to 35 miles per hour. And then they max out at about 45 to 55 miles per hour. So you don't really want to get them too high, because then you're actually going to get into more trouble where you're going to have to turn them off at certain times. But the main part of the main takeaway, I should say, here, and let's go back to this other slide here. Basically what we're looking at, my calculation, my back in the napkin math is right. Basically, we're really only looking for wind speeds on the order of about 7 to 9 meters per second. So once we get into that area, that's basically the reds, the light purples, and the oranges. So as you can see, there's a big difference in terms of the amount of area, especially in the central part of the US, where those wind speeds occur once you get above 100 meters. So of course, the higher you get up, the more access you have to wind, the more places you're going to be able to put those turbines, and the more often those turbines are going to generate electricity. I'm from Wisconsin. I work in Wisconsin, so I typically don't talk about offshore turbines. Don't know a lot about those, but I definitely can say there's exciting technology on the horizon there, mainly because as you get higher up, of course, you need bigger turbines. It's actually a lot easier to get those to those locations when they're just on the shore, as opposed to when they're in the interior of the country. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later too. Also, now it's better technology for floating wind turbines, which means you can put turbines in more offshore locations than you could before. Move them even a little bit further offshore, you can gain access to even better wind power and better wind capacity as well. So,
Sam,
yeah.
Is that something that could eventually be put onto the Great Lakes, or is that something that would be prohibited from that? What are your thoughts on that? Because I think that would be a huge eyesore on the Great Lakes.
We do, I do get that question quite a lot. There's a lot of people that suggest, that maybe we should have offshore wind turbines mostly on Lake Michigan, just because it's so close to Milwaukee and Chicago and other cities. I know that the shelf drops off really abruptly in Lake Michigan, which is kind of the big reason why we can't do wind turbines there right now. Of course, if we get the capability to do floating wind turbines, we can push those even a little further offshore. Hopefully they won't be as much of a eyesore as some people claim them to be. It will be able to harvest the wind even better. But for right now, the technology and the profitability, I think, which is actually even the better part, just isn't there yet.
What about on a shallower Great Lake, such as Erie, for instance?
I think it's probably possible. I haven't, looked into it a ton. Certainly there's, the Great Lakes often have a lakeshore or a landshore breeze, associated with them. I grew up right on the shores of Lake Superior. I can tell you that, in the summer it's way cooler downtown, and in the winter it's a lot warmer downtown. It keeps it nice and temperate. But as far as other lakes and whether or not this technology or this potential has been looked at there, I can't really say for sure.
Sure.
I just want to say, I think I know why the Great Lakes are also a little bit questioned on it. Because of the shipping channels. You only have limited shipping lanes you can put it, and probably where the shipping lanes are, would be most likely where you get the best wind. So you can't really go at screw up the barge traffic to do it. You'd have to do it pretty close to shore, away from any harbors to pull it off, I would think, anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure it's being investigated. Definitely a lot of things there that I don't know about, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some real proposals, soon, if it is possible. All right, so I want to shift a little gears.
Sorry, just one more question.
Go ahead.
I'm curious, you mentioned both the kind of just the size of them, and is that where we're seeing most of our efficiency gains right now in wind generation, is just with the size of them, or is it in, better understanding the blade shapes and, some of that work that's happening with those, or is it really just that we're doing better sighting of them, or what are you seeing as kind of some of the main gains that we're seeing in that from an efficiency standpoint?
I think for the most part, it's probably a combination of just sheer height and a little bit of material science engineering. The blades are lighter, longer. Now, essentially the blades can be as close as, I think, 2/3 of the height of the tower themselves. So, you don't even need super tall towers. You just need towers that are high enough where the end of the blade can, catch that area above 100 meters, and you can still, like I said, expand the potential area where you can gather that wind resource so much more easily. I have some more about that a little bit later on. I'm going to talk about all sorts of different things that you wouldn't typically think about. So I'm going to save that for later, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, I was worried about trying to ask questions about before you had gotten to there.
No, totally fine. I just don't want you to steal my thunder too early. Okay, so I came from this. I approached this question sort of climate change as a scientist. Actually, climate was kind of my focus when I was an undergrad. All my friends were doing cool stuff like modeling and severe storms and satellites and some things like that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the non-physical or the non-meteorological roadblocks to implementing renewable energy. We're going to start with wind, since we're already kind of on the subject of wind. I'm going to talk a little bit about policies. Wisconsin and Minnesota are two very different states, as you can probably guess, not only physically, but also in the policy world as well. I don't want to get too political, but we had a governor for a long time that was just not at all receptive to renewable energy of any type. And we still, for the most part, have a state legislature that is very not receptive, but they are coming around. We do have, thankfully, some conservative-backed groups now in Wisconsin that are actually pushing more for renewable energy. But the policies are still really tricky in our state. We have a main wind siting law that prevents any real big turbines from getting too close to other people's properties. The setback is I think almost 1,500 feet or something like that. We also have smaller, to go along with that, we have smaller farms here in Wisconsin. The average farm size is much smaller than that of Minnesota or Iowa. And with those smaller farm sizes, you need to gather more of those farms up in order to have proper setback distances and things like that. So there's some policies, sort of broad-based. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on that kind of hurt wind siting especially. Transmission is another aspect that I don't think a lot of us think about when we're thinking about renewable energy. We need to get that energy from where it's created to where it's used. And typically, especially in terms of wind, those are hardly ever in the same spots, right? Like I showed you that map of where wind in the United States is generated, and it's in areas that are typically much smaller, much less dense population-wise. So we have to get that energy from where it's, like I said, created to where it's used. And a lot of the times, we actually need upgrades in our transmission lines, because wind turbines produce a lot of electricity when they're going, a lot. Basically now, the only wind turbines that are really in use are being created and put in by utilities, because they're so large, so massive, and they produce so much power that really the utility is the only person that can sort of satisfy that needs. And that's because they're just distributing it to hundreds of thousands of customers on their grid. And then finally, of course, public opinion. This certainly has not been helped by policymakers at both our state and the federal level. You know, I'm not going to get into, you know, all of the supposed health effects from wind turbines, you know, ear cancer and hypersonic noise and things like that. But public opinion is definitely there. You know, these projects have to go through either local or state decision-making processes, and it only takes one or two individuals that are in even that area, maybe not even affected directly by them, to go in and, you know, rattle some chains and make these projects look really unattractive, which is very frustrating. I'm going to shift gears a little here now to solar. I'm going to start with roadblocks to utility scale solar. And a lot of the same kind of roadblocks apply here. We don't have as many regulations, thankfully, in Wisconsin in terms of setbacks and how we can do solar farms here in Wisconsin. Every extremely large project, I think it's over 100 megawatts, does have to go through approval at the Public Service Commission, which is state level. If it's below 100 megawatts, those decisions are made at the local level. Typically that's at the county or like the town board level or something like that. But, you know, obviously we can face roadblocks there as well if there is a committee member or a commissioner who's not particularly receptive to renewable energy. Location is another factor. You know, transmission doesn't come into effect as much with solar because the energy that's produced by solar is on a much more gradual scale. We can kind of, I don't want to say we can control it, but it's much more steady. It's not nearly as intermittent as wind is, but it still needs to be somewhat close to a transmission line, right? So you can't just put it anywhere. Otherwise, you'd have to build a full new transmission line, and that, of course, costs money as well. So we do need to take in location. And then the same thing, public opinion. We don't usually face as much disdain for solar panels as we do for wind turbines, but you'd be surprised, it is there. There are homeowners that claim that it will, you know, ruin the value of nearby homes and nearby property. There are people that claim that, you know, they moved out to the country so they wouldn't have to look at technology or anything but corn stalks for some reason. So that's there for solar scale, for utility scale solar as well as utility scale wind. There are a few roadblocks for private solar. This is like non-utility, so like a business or a home or something like that. They're not typically as concerning. There are some policies, though, that come into play here, things like building codes, etc. There's a new one that's a fire code that's kind of being really restrictive in our state. Some municipalities have kind of taken up this code, some have kind of disregarded it, which is good. But there are instances like that, even at like the residential level, that can impede solar adoption. The bigger issue is usually physical, right? Like it's, I don't have solar at my home because I have 3 big silver maples in front of my house. And the biggest reason by far to sort of private solar adoption is cost. Even for, you know, businesses and corporations that make a lot of money, they still don't want to make the investment. A lot of them are making that decision based off of old numbers and old return on investments. Typically, when I go out and talk to a business about how quickly a solar array can pay for itself and then offset, you know, anywhere from 20% to close to 100% of their electricity, they kind of, I get the sort of drop the jaw reaction. They can't really believe that it's true. And thankfully, we have a few more businesses that are doing that now, and they're trying to get the word out as much as they can as well. So it's coming along slowly, but it is coming along, thankfully. And I don't want to dwell too long on the roadblocks. I want to talk a little bit about the road ahead. I just want to see how much time I have. It's like I'm pretty good here. So, you know, we are a renewable energy advocacy and policy organization. We do try to get as much solar and wind and other renewables done as we can. And this is kind of the way we're doing it. We're doing it through policy work, through public support, through the utilities, and through economics as well. I'm going to kind of touch on each of those a little bit. This is a super boring slide, but I threw it up anyways in case there are any political nerds out there. So this is kind of just a brief run through of some of the policies, both federal and in Wisconsin, that have helped to kind of break the ice. I think a better way to show this is through a tax credit graph right here. So this graph indicates the amount of renewable energy, solar and wind in blue, solar in yellow, that has been made over the last 20 plus years. And the dotted lines and the other line indicate where the tax credits have been during those times. So typically the tax credits follow a little bit behind the installation. So you offer the tax credits, the installations get done, and then the tax credits are reaped afterwards once the installations have made. And you can see this here, especially in the blue bars with wind. 2007 to 2009, a lot of wind was installed. The tax credits kind of show that, how those tax credits were taken advantage of. Same in 2012 here as well. There are no more tax credits left for wind, unfortunately. So, but that does not mean that's a bad thing, honestly. Wind is really holding its own. In fact, wind is actually, it is cheaper now to build a brand new wind farm than it is to operate an existing coal plant. It's one of the main reasons that coal is dying all across the country. Solar, on the other hand, those tax credits are still in effect for this year and for next year. We're really hoping maybe with the election here in a few days, maybe we get some change at the federal level that will reinstate those credits. But for right now, we got to kind of work with what we have. But as you can see, those tax credits kind of mirror the graph as well. We've done a lot of solar in the last few years. If you take a look at this graph, 2016 was a huge year for solar. That's because originally 2017 was the year that those tax credits were going to roll away. And so a lot of people installed those years. We had a lot of people install last year when the tax credits for solar were still at 30%. Those tax credits this year are at 26%. They're going to go down to 22% next year and then go away completely in 2022. So last year, this year, and next year, we expect a lot of solar to be done, not just in Wisconsin here, but really all over the country. We've definitely seen that. Our state incentive, it's a program called Focus on Energy. They give out incentives at the state level. They completely maxed out their budget this year. They're actually borrowing from next year, and their budget runs in a 3-year cycle. So they'll be up for another budget approval, not next year, but in 2022. And we certainly hope that the fight will happen actually next year. So that's going to be a big goal for us next year, is to either keep that Focus on Energy funding at the level or hopefully even increase it as well, because we definitely have seen a lot of solar adoption in our state thanks to those credits. After, I should say, other than policy side, another reason renewables have grown so much in the last few years is just due to public support. Regardless of what side of the political aisle you might be on, renewable energy is extremely popular. Not just the implementation of it, but the research into it as well, trying to find new technologies, ways that the United States can innovate above other countries. So there's definitely that public need, that public want is there. And you can see it in this graph right here. Wind and solar still overwhelmingly favored, especially compared to other forms of energy. And another way that it gains public support is through job creation. Solar installer and wind turbine technician are the two fastest growing jobs in the country by a long shot. I think those are growing at an average of like 45 to 50% per year. The third highest growing job, I believe, is not nurse, but home healthcare provider, and that is growing at somewhere in like the 32 to 33% range. So these jobs are growing almost exponentially. We're going to have, we're going to need a lot of workers on the ground. These are jobs that can't be outsourced to other countries. So it's a really good way for us we're going to be able to revitalize our economy going forward as well. So this is another reason why renewable energy really kind of goes across political boundaries once you really get down into the nuts and bolts of it. And then another reason why it's grown so much is because of corporate support. Everybody worships the almighty dollar, right? These are just a few examples of some of the big corporate names that have renewable energy goals and commitments. These are definitely, it says Wisconsin operations, but clearly these organizations are not relegated just to Wisconsin. And there's good reasons for corporations to do this. Not only do they get, things like tax credits, they get cost savings, especially if they have the solar or the wind on site. But they also get to portray their brand image in a much better way. Consumers have overwhelmingly declared that they want, they would prefer a company that has renewable energy goals or that uses renewable energy as opposed to a company that doesn't use renewable energy. And not only can they attract more customers this way, they can also attract and maintain more employees as well. So there's just a whole host of reasons why big money, big business would want to do renewable energy. And then, I should say there's two more points here I want to make why renewable energy is growing so much. And this one might surprise some of you, but utilities are actually making commitments too. They're coming along a little bit more slowly than we'd like, but they are coming along. And these are just the Wisconsin utilities. I think I have some information on Minnesota utilities as well, but this just kind of will show you sort of what we have going here across the border. The biggest utility, unfortunately, We Energies, which kind of serves the Milwaukee area and most of the lakeshore of Lake Michigan, they have only committed to an 80% reduction in CO2, so not even an 80% renewable energy portfolio, just an 80% reduction in CO2, which again is frustrating because they are definitely the largest utility here in the state, but a lot of the other ones have made larger, if not full 100% renewable energy commitments. So that's very exciting. So hopefully once all of these utilities make these commitments, it will result in about a 75% reduction, it will take Wisconsin's entire renewable energy ratios to about 75%. So the other bad thing is this is not until, a lot of these goals aren't until 2050. So hopefully we can speed that up a little. And that's one of the big things that we at Renew are trying to do. So super exciting there, but none of this really would be possible without this. This is the costs of what wind and solar have done lately. This is what has put renewable energy, by far, this is the biggest reason why renewable energy is a player now. I said before, it's cheaper to do a brand new solar or brand new wind farm, than it is to operate an existing coal plant. I think with one exception, nearly all of the additional energy generation types that has been proposed in Wisconsin in the last 2 years, all but one of those has been for wind or solar, primarily solar. Solar farms are basically like the default energy type now for Wisconsin utilities, which is really exciting and a little surprising as well too. In Minnesota and Iowa, you guys both have a lot more wind resources. There's definitely a lot more wind right now. Iowa is up to I think 40% wind, which is just astounding. And but here in Wisconsin, we have solar, and solar is great because it's very scalable. Like I said, you can produce full, power plants with this on utility scale, or you can, produce as little electricity as your home, or I've seen solar panels now on RVs and campers and things like that. So it's really exciting. But again, like the main reason why this renewable energy transition is happening is because the price, and that definitely helps us with policies, with lawmakers, Republican lawmakers, more conservative lawmakers, see these costs and they definitely want to get on board. They see the advantages that utility scale size solar farms and wind farms can have for their rural communities. There's a wind farm in the southwest part of the state that went online, I believe it was 2 years ago. And the annual payments to the county just from that one wind farm, that one annual payment per year, actually covers the entire operating cost of the entire county. So they have now access to great great funding for their local government operations. And not only that, but it also adds money to their it adds jobs to their town, to their areas. It has implications certainly for more urban areas as well. We're able to take coal plants offline. There's not things like coal ash and other public health concerns, things like asthma causes and whatnot that are also at play here. So I cannot understate the importance of this reduced costs. And that is actually my last slide. That's what I'm going to end on. So just want to thank you all again for having me. I got a couple minutes left for questions, but I can stick around longer too if there are any. But that's all I have, and just wanted to say thanks.
Anybody have any questions for Sam? This is prime time. I find it interesting that your last point there with the solar farm generating the county's governing operating funds for a year is, wow. I mean, that speaks volumes to that it can be something that's profitable besides just a fad or something expensive to implement.
Yeah, when I toured that farm, I actually was lucky enough to tour it with some state Republican lawmakers. There's a new organization, I shouldn't say new, they're somewhat new, called the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum. And their executive director is a younger guy, but he's definitely a conservative. And he takes these lawmakers around on these tours of wind and solar farms and talks about all the benefits, the tax revenue to the county or to the municipality, the jobs that are created, and just all of the factors, and especially for rural parts of Wisconsin and the Midwest, parts that have been hit pretty hard economically. These projects are almost a godsend to some of them. And I also, yeah.
Question on solar. Out here just west of the Twin Cities metro, we've seen quite a few counties doing zoning moratoriums on more solar because, again, local pushback on it. Is that something that you're seeing widely as we're around the region, or is that really kind of just the tool that some local, especially county level here in Minnesota, has chosen to use to slow some of these down? Or what are you seeing as far as that? Because like you'd mentioned earlier, I'm kind of a policy wonk on that kind of stuff, so I've been watching that pretty closely.
Well, full disclosure, I am not a policy wonk. I'm getting better, but definitely not a wonk. So I don't know exactly how it's structured in Minnesota, but in Wisconsin, one thing that the state legislature did do, which we're now kind of taking advantage of, is for a lot of these, and I guess I'm talking more about wind here, but it does apply somewhat to solar. The county or the local municipality can't enact more regulation than the state level does. So they are very limited. They still can do it in some cases. We've seen it a couple of times in wind, and it's been a situation where it really hasn't been tested. Like, it's been more of a threat than anything else. Like, they threatened to put a wind turbine moratorium up, and that just kind of scares the developer away. So it's not necessarily working. Like, it hasn't been put to the test in a courtroom or anything like that. But we've seen that tactic certainly been used here in Wisconsin as well.
Yeah, because in Minnesota, a lot of that power, until you get up into the big ones where it goes before the PUC, you end up at the county, or what we call the regional coordination zones. You have like the one that most people know is the Met Council for the Twin Cities area, but every part of Minnesota has one of those. And that's been some of those governmental bodies that have been leverage to push back on some of these. Some of those moratoriums are now finally expiring, and we have seen some more solar build out, and certainly some of our local cooperatives have been some of the biggest proponents of solar. The local cooperative here, which we have a share in their community solar farm, they've really been pushing those hard, and to great success, because they talk about that very same thing. What you mentioned is not having to do those huge transmission investments. They maybe have to do transmission to just the next town, to wherever they already have a substation, and they maybe build that substation out a little bit more or whatever, increase capacity there. But
For sure.
something that we've seen in the West Metro, the Twin Cities, really successfully being utilized now, just in the last couple of years.
Yeah, those community solar projects that you have in Minnesota have been extremely influential. We don't really have those here. There are a couple of one-offs. Thankfully, we actually have one here in Madison with Madison Gas and Electric. They did a larger array at an airport just outside of town, and so you could buy shares of that. And so my wife and I bought shares, so like half of our electricity use now is coming from that solar farm. So that's super exciting. We just would like to get that that setup more broadly used across our state.
Okay. And for some of the, I guess, to continue that in then to the private residential ones, are you seeing some of these neighborhood associations starting to finally relax some of their rules around allowing solar arrays on rooftops? Or some of these, I think that's probably been one of the big things. Even, ham radio folks even know that about restrictions about putting antennas up, or all of these covenant restrictions around, architectural requirements and so forth.
Yeah, thankfully, there is a state law in Wisconsin that sort of prohibits that. We obviously run into problems with HOAs in this regard. And again, this is sort of a thing where they use it more as a scare tactic. The HOA just says, nope, you can't do it, and then that's typically where it ends. But I tell people, well, the HOA can't legally tell you can't do it, right? Like they can stare you, and I don't know, they might even be able to fine you, which might be enough of a deterrent in its own right. But that's where we've gotten pushback on the residential side, mostly is from HOAs. And in some degree, some cities in Wisconsin are just, I wouldn't say they're against solar, but they just some of the soft costs like permitting in that are a little bit more egregious in the regulations. So because of that, just the soft costs go up, and it makes it more expensive. And even that alone can be enough of a deterrent for some solar contractors not to work in those cities. And because of that, there's not as much competition. And because of that, the price gets even higher just naturally.
I find it very surprising that for the individual homeowner that there is even any pushback to having solar on your own roof, because it's not any more unsightly than looking at your roof, really.
But that's what I always tell people. I said, who likes to look at roof shingles, really? Like, I don't know. It seems very strange to me.
I know many in HOAs that would very stringently disagree with you on that. I don't agree with them, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had a battle with an HOA for a while. I'm sure it will happen soon. I probably should be knocking on wood, but yeah, there were it ranged in everything from this panel, which is black, is somehow reflecting sunlight directly into the next person's house, to why can't you just put the solar on the side facing away from the street? And I tell them, well, that's north, and the sun doesn't really shine from the north, hardly ever. So that really is just not going to be effective at all. So that's, yeah, the pushback in home solar is very, very rare. It's usually just the physical constraint. The homeowner just physically can't put the solar panels on the roof and get a return on investment that's not 20 years or 25 years or something like that.
What is the average return on investment number of years down to now these days?
It for a home, it ranges from it averages about 8, but it can be as low as 6 or 7.
Wow.
For businesses, it can be 4 years or less with
Oh, wow.
tax credits and accelerated depreciation and things like that. It also depends on the size of your business and what utility you're in. Another thing that's frustrating in Wisconsin is each utility has its own policies and rules surrounding net metering. So if you don't know what net metering is, it's kind of like a virtual battery. So for every kilowatt hour you export to the grid, you can basically take a kilowatt hour in free 1-to-1. So each utility in Wisconsin has different thresholds or metrics for how they do net metering. And that's something we'd like to see change, hopefully maybe in the next calendar year or so. But it's going to be a tricky fight as well.
Are we seeing any issues? I know we have for a while down in Texas, where especially in the overnight hours, we're actually dipping to near zero or even negative as far as some of the costs for the energy, or I guess what it's being paid for. Is that really a problem just around that transmission issue with stuff being made out, with that energy being made out in the middle of Texas, or are we seeing that anywhere else in the country?
I don't know for sure. I think, and this is kind of just speculating because I don't know exactly. The grid and how the grid works and how people buy and sell energy is extremely complicated. I'm really only just learning it. I think what's going on there in Texas is, you have a lot of wind energy that's being produced at times when not a lot of people are using that electricity, right? So it's they can kind of max out their wind production that way. And wind is very cheap to run and to operate, so you can bid that price in super low. I don't know what super low means. I just know that it is super low in comparison to other types of electricity, especially at that time of day when people aren't using it and there's very little demand. I think that's what's happening there. We're definitely not anywhere close to that here in the Midwest. Maybe we might get that way in Iowa if Iowa continues to build out their wind as they have. But at this point, that Iowa wind is going to other places. It's coming here to Wisconsin because we don't have a lot of wind resources here. Actually, it's probably going to Chicago and to St. Louis, some other places. That's the only danger I see anywhere in the near term for that.
Okay.
Wind is super cool too. I meant to mention this too. Your earlier question made me think of it, and then I forgot to mention it. Another one of the sort of roadblocks, if you want to call it that, to wind that was super unexpected is as these turbines get bigger, a big problem is getting those components to the site. So for instance, now the blades are so long, they can't actually fit down a normal highway. It's gotten that bad. My hometown of Duluth is one of the main, I think is actually the main Great Lakes port where those turbine components come in from overseas. And in fact, the freeway going through Duluth is actually getting a facelift over the next few years. And they have to upgrade it in a way so that the turbine blades can get off the ships, get onto the trucks, and essentially make it around the curve. So it's really, it's quite the catch-22, right? You want to build these bigger turbines with these bigger blades, and you're getting impacted by things as random as, civil engineering and highways and left turns and right turns and things like that. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah, I've seen most of those blades now, instead of them really using like a trailer they're putting on, it's basically just a truck at each end, a wheel truck at the end of each blade, and that's how it's.
Yeah, because they don't have a trailer, a flatbed long enough, right? Then that's why these technological innovations to offshore wind is going to be so important, because we're going to be able to and at that point, literally the sky is the limit, right? You're not going to be encumbered by things like highways and other civil engineering mishaps.
So I guess another question is when we're seeing these, bigger turbines, bigger blades and everything, so that we're hopefully capturing more wind, is that making wind production more consistent as well? And overall, because, that's been kind of one of the, folks think about when your carbon footprint around it is still with wind and solar, you're still having to have, short fuse stations available, usually natural gas, to have those, to get those lower times. Are we seeing better performance in that aspect as well?
That's a good question. I honestly, I'm not sure because I think we're still a little too much in our infancy stages to know. I would assume it would, like the higher up you go, the more wind you gather throughout the course of the day. As you can probably guess, most wind farms generate their electricity, starting in the afternoon and then going into the kind of like overnight hours. So yeah, I would think so. The higher those turbines get, the more consistent the wind is, regardless of the time of day or the diurnal cycles. So yeah, probably. But I actually haven't seen any data on that to back it up, so I can only speculate.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'll be quiet now and let others ask some questions. But this is super interesting for me. So.
Oh, my pleasure. Yeah, I mean it's a real, in Wisconsin here, there's a real sort of onerous on us to make this happen. And we at Renew really like to make an argument from an economic view. That we spend literally billions of dollars a year, sending money to Wyoming and Texas and Oklahoma for coal and for natural gas and for petrol and things like that. So if we can, if we can get off, it's not just beneficial to the environment to get our state off of those types of energy, but it's just better for our pocketbook as well. And that's why we've been able to grow our coalition quite a bit over the last couple of years, because like I said, people on both sides of the political aisle see those dollar signs, see them leaving, see the potential to keep them here in the state, and that's very enticing for a lot of folks.
I was just going to say that's the one great political equalizer, right? Is that the numbers just
exactly
no longer a political conversation.
All right, other questions?
How are our numbers? I mean, you compared Wisconsin to Germany, 1 to 10%. Are other countries around the world that are as developed as we are they comparable to Germany? Are they at like 5, 6, 8%? And like the US is stuck in this bubble of like what, 2 to 3% maybe at most?
We're actually a little bit higher than you might think. We're at about 18 to 20% nationwide. The overwhelming majority of that is actually hydropower. We've had hydro for a long time. States like Washington and Oregon produce over half of their electricity just from hydro. So I don't know exactly. I can tell you what Minnesota is at. Let me see here. I just had that slide up.
That does raise the question as well too. Why is Wisconsin so low in comparison then if the U.S. average is at near 20%?
Quite frankly, it is because, like I said, 8 years prior to 2018, we had both a governor and a state legislature that was extremely against renewable energy. I don't really know how else to put that. I don't like to get too political if I can avoid it, but that's just kind of where it's at. I was looking around for some figures on Minnesota and total renewable usage. I see you guys are 8th in the country for wind production, so that's certainly good. But I don't know. Sorry, I don't know where you guys are at. I know in Wisconsin here, I think we're the solar is about 1%. It's actually less than that. Starting next year, we have 2 big solar farms that are going to be coming online, so that'll put us over 1%. And I think that will get us to. I think we're rated about the national average, maybe a little bit below. I think we're like 15% or something like that. I could find that out too in just a second.
Well,
But yeah, I mean, we're low because. Oh, sorry.
I was
Go
gonna say,
ahead.
Sam, I can't help but notice every once in a while the couple flashes of lightning out the window behind you there.
Oh yeah, we have some storms rolling through here. Let me see. Yeah, so I mean, honestly, like the reason, like I said, that Wisconsin is behind is just because for 8+ years, when everybody else was going through, kind of their big transitions, we did not. We just didn't. And not only that, we stayed largely at coal, which is even more ridiculous. Yeah, I think Wisconsin is like 12% renewables, so we're definitely on the lower end of the scale. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do. Germany as a whole, I think, is at like 35 to 40% or something like that. I don't know who's top. It's probably like a small country, like a small, I don't know, island nation or something that's just doesn't have to produce a whole lot of electricity to get to that point. I know actually the UK has been doing a lot of renewable energy. They have a ton of offshore wind. So they're making some big strides as well. But I don't know who's tops, unfortunately.
What's the cost comparison, say, for a solar or wind farm in operation versus a coal plant or a nuclear plant, even for that matter?
Like I said, I know that it is cheaper to, like I said, build a brand new existing wind farm than it is to operate a coal farm. Part of the reason why coal has become so expensive in the last 10 years is actually more due to natural gas prices. Natural gas just, it was so cheap to build natural gas plants, right, for so long. And now that's going to be the way it is for wind and solar, thankfully. So, natural gas kind of shot coal plants, and we're putting the final nail in the coffin with renewable energy. I don't know. Again, once you get into the grid and how much energy costs, and at certain times of the day, we get into the weeds pretty quick. But I do know that coal is definitely the most expensive form of energy to make, maybe with the exception of some like peaker natural gas plants that they use just during summertime days when it's really hot and the grid is going nuts.
Any other thoughts for Sam here while we have him on the line? Looks like you are all questioned out, and I'm sure if they have any questions, they could probably get in touch with me, and I could send them your way. Or
yeah, I did have that my email up on the board there for a while. I can put it back up if anybody wants to write it down. But it's just sam@renewwisconsin.org, all written out as one word. So I love getting questions. I get an emailed question probably once a day, at least, from a random person from the States. So it's one of the things I like to do, honestly. So yeah, definitely, if you have questions, send them my way.